Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the fourth webinar of the NAMA facility. My name is David. I'm the head of the technical support unit of the NAMA facility and will be moderating today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us yet again in great numbers. This time around we have received more than 320 registrations, so it's quite a busy session and we keep on growing from webinar to webinar. A very warm welcome to all of you. Our series of webinars aims at providing information on the NAMA facility and disseminating lessons learned from our activities. During the last year, we have had 3 webinars focusing on financial mechanisms and information on our fourth call. All 3 webinars can be downloaded from our website. The objective of today's webinar is to reflect on some initial lessons learned from the fourth call of the NAMA facility. On the following slides, you can see the TSU colleagues who have been involved in today's webinar. So to the right of myself, you can see, now it's different order here, you can see Katharina to the right of myself, then Tina, Ash and Ernesta. Tina and Ernesta are in charge of the technical functioning of the webinar, while Ash and Katharina will guide us through the content of this webinar and will answer and address your questions in the Q&A sessions. I will be moderating the webinar. Before going into the details of the content of our webinar, let me pass you over to my colleague Ernesta, who will guide you through some technical aspects of the webinar.
Thank you, Søren, and hello everybody. So first, let me give you a quick introduction to the control panel of the webinar, which you can see here on the right side of the PowerPoint slide. I will also show these using my mouse. You have several settings. First, you can hide the control panel. Second, due to the high amount of participants, we have put all participants on mute and you will not be able to unmute yourself. Third, you can view the webinar in the full screen using this button. This could be useful as the sessions will be accompanied by a presentation. Fourth, you can adjust the language of the control panel using the globe that you can find on the top of control panel. Also, you have a question tab where we ask you to write down the questions that you have throughout the session. You type in the question window that you find in the control panel. We, the webinar hosts, will be the only ones that can see it. We will answer the questions in the question and answer session, so please submit them beforehand. I will now hand over the word back to Søren for a brief introduction to the NAMA facility.
Thank you, Ernesta. Let's first have a brief look at today's agenda. Just now, as the first part of today's webinar, I will provide you with a short introduction to the NAMA facility itself. In the second part, I will present a short review of the applications received under the fourth call for NAMA support projects. In our third part, Ash and Katharina will share a detailed analysis and lessons learned from fourth call applications and enrich these lessons with experience from the NAMA facility's fourth call NSPs selected to proceed to the detailed preparation phase. We will have 3 breaks for questions and answers. 1 break after the second part, 1 during the third part on lessons learned, and a final round of questions and answers right at the end of the webinar. We'd like to keep these Q&A sessions to around 5 minutes each. Questions which might not be addressed during those Q&A sessions will be responded to as a follow-up to the webinar. Let's turn to the first part of today's agenda, a short introduction to the NAMA facility. NAMA facility supports developing countries and emerging economies in implementing ambitious NAMAs. NAMAs can function as an important building block to implement nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. NAMAs are voluntary climate protection measures taken by developing countries and emerging economies, which are embedded in national strategies for low carbon development. The NAMA facility was established by BMUB, the Federal German Ministry for the Environment, and BASE, the UK Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, previously DEC, in 2012. In 2015, the European Commission namely its DG Climate and DEFCO, and the Danish Ministry of Energy, Utilities and Climate, and the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, joined the NAMA facility as additional donors. Representatives of these donor institutions are members of our board of the NAMA facility, the central decision-making body. The donors of the NAMA facility have made available, up until now, a total amount of more than 260 million euros for support. The TSU, that is the Technical Support Unit, is the NAMA facility secretariat and responsible, among others, for organizing the calls for NAMA support projects. The NAMA facility provides funding to NAMA support projects that have the potential to catalyze transformational change towards low carbon development in the overall sector targeted. As there's only limited funding available, the NAMA facility focuses its support on the most ambitious and transformational NAMA support projects. In order to identify them, the NAMA facility organizes calls for NAMA support projects, which have been run on an annual basis so far. In the previous 3 calls, 14 NAMA support projects have been selected, and in the 4th call, further 7 NAMA support projects have been pre-selected to receive funding for a detailed preparation phase. You can find information on those projects, actually all of them, on our website, and we will make reference to one of them, some of them which have been identified during the 4th call in our content of the webinar today. The NAMA support projects provide a combination of financial and technical measures to support the most ambitious parts of sector-wide NAMA implementation. These NAMA support projects have a duration of 3 to 5 years each and can receive a funding volume of 5 to 20 million euros from the NAMA facility. In line with the objective of the NAMA facility, key selection requirements for NAMA support projects are that they should be ready for actual implementation of mitigation actions, that they should be ambitious in terms of mitigation potential, financial leverage, and their potential for transformation. We want to once again point out that the NAMA facility does not have any regional or sectoral focus. After this introduction, let us now turn to the second part of the webinar, a short review of the 4th call for NAMA support projects. In the 4th call, 75 submissions were received, showing a large regional and sectoral spread. We received 32 submissions from African countries, 23 from Asia, 16 from the Americas, and another 4 from European countries. Submissions from a wide range of sectors were submitted, with the largest share focusing on climate actions in the energy sector. There, both renewable energy and energy efficiency are targeted, followed by submissions from forestry, waste and wastewater treatment, followed by transport and agriculture. Many national governments refer to their NDCs in their applications. NAMAs are important building blocks for NDC implementation. The funders of the NAMA facility have selected 7 NAMA support projects to be sent into a detailed preparation phase. My colleague Tina will send you the link to the overview on those projects on our website right now. Key factors for success were a higher rating with regard to ambition and feasibility of the proposed NAMA support project, but likewise a high financial ambition, e.g. higher leverage of public and private funding. The linkage between NAMAs and NDCs was also crucial for being successful, and last but not least, a high potential for transformational change, with supporting transformational change towards a low carbon trajectory being one of the core objectives of the NAMA facility. The NAMA facility strives towards being a learning hub and is constantly trying to improve processes and materials. For instance, during the fourth call, a detailed preparation phase has been introduced to allow a more thorough preparation of the individual proposals. To increase learning, the NAMA facility provided individual feedback to applicants to reflect the main points of the technical assessment back to the applicants. The assessment was led by a team of independent assessors. The NAMA facility feedback calls are a two-way process, as the NAMA facility likewise requested feedback from applicants on their processes and templates to improve and adapt where possible. This feedback was taken in a structured way and will serve the NAMA facility as an important instrument to further improve our processes. Just to mention, with the same objective, the NAMA facility underwent a midterm evaluation process during the last year. The midterm evaluation report and the NAMA facility's management response are both available on the NAMA facility website and interlinked with this presentation that we will publish after the webinar. That was a short introduction to the NAMA facility and the review of the fourth call for NAMA support projects. We will now enter into our first Q&A session. So question number one, and I'm looking now towards Ash, who's next to me. Hi Ash, who will respond. It was mentioned that the NAMA facility has earmarked 60 million euros for the fourth call. How many of the NAMA support projects that have now been selected for the detailed preparation phase will receive funding for implementation?
Okay, thank you, Søren, for this question. The NAMA facility has indeed earmarked 60 million euros for the call. However, if more of these NAMA support projects than are detailed in that are in the detailed preparation phase are of interest to the donors, it may be possible that additional funding may be made available to fund their implementation, subject to the donor's decision.
Okay, thank you, Ash. Looking at my screen, selecting the next question. Okay, will there be a fourth call, and if so, when will this call be opened?
Okay, at this point, the donors have not made a final decision on a fifth call. We will communicate all relevant information when we have it via our website and our NAMA facility mailing list.
Okay, thank you. One more question at this stage. Ash, we mentioned that there are 7 projects that are in the preparation phase now. Can you provide some details on where they stand now and what will be the next steps?
Okay, thank you. So we expect the 7 NAMA support projects to go into the detailed preparation phase in April. They will then have up to 18 months to prepare a comprehensive proposal. Each NAMA support project has its own individual duration time, and this can be up to a maximum of 18 months. Once the proposals have been submitted to the NAMA facility, the donors will take decisions on these on an ongoing basis for funding of the full implementation.
All right, thank you, Ash. I see that we have quite a substantial number of additional questions coming in. How many of them actually, Esther, by now? Or maybe some 10, 15 additional questions. As I've said before, we will come back to you individually by the latest as a follow-up to this webinar, or in the next 2 Q&A blocks we will be having as part of the webinar itself. So thanks again for all your questions. They will be addressed. We will now move to the core of our webinar today, the analysis and lessons learned from the fourth call experience. These observations also build on the experience of previous calls, of course. I will pass for that section over to my colleague Ash Sharma again, and also to Katharina Petz, who will take us through this section of the webinar. So please take it.
Okay, thank you, Søren. First of all, I will make some general comments on the ambition criteria that was previously described. We found that the outlines which scored most highly demonstrated strong government commitment and what we refer to as embeddedness. This may include, for example, the relevance of the NAMA support project in the national sector context, i.e. the sector in question commands significant government attention in terms of mitigation policies or builds on existing initiatives. The relationship to the relevant NDC, which is something that was found to be highly evident in the shortlisted projects, or the significance of the sector in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. For example, the sector contributes more than, say, 5% of national emissions. Moving on, the transformational change is the cornerstone of the NAMA facility. Here, the best proposals we received demonstrated the host government's willingness to put into effect an irreversible change towards a low-carbon pathway, much faster than a business-as-usual development. This is typically evidenced by policy reforms and regulatory instruments, including relevant enforcement measures as appropriate, such as limitations, bans and phase-outs, fees and other economic instruments, including fossil fuel subsidy reform and redirection of other harmful subsidies. At this point, one should also describe other windows of opportunity which make structural change timely. For example, the introduction of a new biofuel law. It should be noted that the outline must go beyond a conventional project scenario. For example, an on-grid PV power plant is a good low-carbon investment in itself, but may not score well on transformation. Another example is a typical replacement scenario, for instance, simply replacing outmoded technology, which is essentially a business-as-usual exercise, which faces some barriers. National initiatives usually have a stronger case for transformation. However, if a national program is not practicable, for example, in a very large country, then how is the scaling and replication foreseen in practice at the regional or national level? Financial ambition is another key aspect. This is best evidenced by leveraging of private sector capital through, for example, investors' equity, bank loans, user fees and tariffs, and or a significant mobilization of domestic public sector funding. For example, budgetary allocations. At a minimum, this should be greater than the NAMA facility's contribution. Mitigation potential is a key aspect of ambition, as the NAMA facility is first and foremost a climate change mitigation instrument. However, we continue to see that mitigation potential is often overestimated or poorly substantiated. Direct greenhouse gas mitigation should be transparently presented based on an adequately defined business-as-usual scenario and using relevant methodologies, including IPCC and Clean Development Mechanism methodologies. Estimation of indirect mitigation potential was often completely missing in proposals. And finally, I would say that greenhouse gases should be cost-effective in terms of euros per ton of CO2 equivalent. After presenting these general lessons learned, let us have a short look at some experiences from our fourth call to reflect some of the core issues mentioned. For this, I will pass the word to Katerina, who will guide us through it.
Yeah, thank you, Ash, and hello to everybody. Here on the map, you can see 7 NAMA support projects that have been selected for the detailed preparation phase. One of the key criteria for selection mentioned just now by Ash is the potential for transformational change. The NAMA support project in Tunisia here is a good example to illustrate this. Tunisia is determined to put its energy sector onto the low carbon development path. This is also reflected in its NDC. Blessed with sun, solar energy applications are of course an obvious choice for the country. The wider NAMA targets clean energy in the building sector and comprises solar water heaters, PV rooftop installations, as well as energy efficiency measures to decrease the energy consumption of the building stock. Tunisia has already established and is operating a quite successful national-wide support program for solar water heaters. The core feature is a widely and easily accessible funding scheme via the electricity bill that enables access also for poorer households with no own bank account and a lack of creditworthiness. Based on this positive experience, Tunisia has also started to introduce a support mechanism for larger PV rooftop installations. Now the NAMA support project seeks to trigger the transformational change by including households with smaller energy consumption into this successful support mechanism and thus reaching a relevant scale. While this target group is certainly more difficult to reach, it makes up to more than 80% of all households in Tunisia. So we are talking about a very significant proportion here. As a target group of households with relatively small energy consumption is also highly subsidized, the government and the state-owned energy utility have a deep interest to implement the program at a large scale and thus decrease the level of fossil fuel subsidy in the midterm perspective. As the market reaches a significant scale, a decrease in unit prices is expected so that the subsidy level then for PV can be decreased as well. Looking at another example with regard to the mitigation potential, the rice NAMA in Thailand is a good project to look at. Here the NAMA focuses on a subsector in agriculture that is in Thailand highly relevant for climate change and with a very large potential for mitigation action, not only in Thailand but also in other rice producing countries. During the cultivation of paddy rice, a significant amount of methane is released while the rice plants are set under water and growing. As you probably know, methane has a global warming potential of 28 compared to CO2. Thailand now wants to introduce an innovative low-carbon cultivation method by improving water management in the rice cultivation at a large scale. And by doing so, methane emissions will be avoided or at least minimized. The approach also responds to the interest of farmers and to the demand for sustainably produced rice from national and international customers, and the use of fertilizers and water resources are reduced at the same time. Farmers are also expected to see higher yields. The NAMA will therefore also work on the introduction of the Sustainable Rice Platform Standard. This standard was initially developed by UNEP together with other key market actors. I will pass the word now back to Ash to present some lessons learned on the other key criterion, feasibility.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. With regard to feasibility, the NAMA facility is essentially looking for the following. The importance of a plausible project rationale and scope should be evidenced by a comprehensive and substantiated barrier analysis. So how specifically does the NAMA support project overcome the identified economic and financial barriers? It should make reference to clearly defined and described target groups or end users. Implementation readiness is also an important aspect. This should be demonstrated taking into account the detailed project preparation phase and up to 5 years of NAMA support project implementation. We will revert to this point later on. Most projects build on pilots and predecessor initiatives. The best outlines analyzed these lessons learned, for example, which strategies and mechanisms worked well, rather than simply to list the initiatives. We would also like to make some general observations relating to technology considerations. The current and proposed climate-friendly technology to be deployed should be adequately described. The latter's economic and technical viability in the given country context in particular should be addressed. Several projects have proposed technological pilots. The NAMA facility expects that projects are feasible within the aforementioned timescale, taking into account issues such as procurement, land use, and environmental and social concerns. Finally, what is the business case for these sub-projects? We shall consider this aspect further. The term business model is taken to address the economic viability of the project concept for the target group, end users or other actors, and or producers or suppliers. So for instance, business models should be considered from the perspective of building owners in the case of energy efficiency, energy consumers in the case of renewables, and households in the case of improved cook stoves. We found that the most convincing outlines in the fourth call address the following key issues. The economic and other motivations of each group should be adequately described. It should be explained that the project rationale is cost-effective or profitable for the identified users and suppliers. Proponents should describe the incentives to change behavior, to redirect investment and capital flows, taking into account the market conditions, competitiveness, and pricing issues. They should aim to demonstrate using calculations and evidence on issues, for example, price differentials between the current and low carbon technologies, operating costs, using where appropriate investment appraisal for internal rates of return, calculating break-even points and payback times, etc. Any assumptions made should be justified, for example, references to recent studies or fieldwork. Affordability is key. After the transitional support of the NAMA facilities intervention, the new technology should be priced within the affordability of the target group. Alternatively, a concept for sustainable financing of the uptake should be described. We'll revert to this point again. Our experience has indicated that business cases primarily built on capital cost or CapEx, capital expenditure subsidies, are rarely considered transformational, and these typically offer a low leverage rate. One should be careful to avoid market distortions, such as preferential treatment of one or a few private actors or investors, and a transparent and fair process for selecting making capital allocations should be in place. A capital subsidy model may not be financially sustainable or scalable, resulting in a low transformational effect. However, if using such a model, proponents should demonstrate the sustainability or transformational aspect. Excuse me. If using such a model, please note that the NAMA facility typically supports only a minor share of the capital. Now, demonstration projects are commonly proposed to the facility on the basis of the proof of concept, implying that a self-sustaining business model would take root once the technology is demonstrated. In general, this assertion needs to be better substantiated. In particular, a bankable business case should be made regarding how the NAMA support project will replicate and scale, given that the projects supported by the NAMA support project have already received a high share of grant or subsidy and are in the absence of real-life financing conditions. The higher the capital subsidy, the less likely that later market participants can emulate the model through, for example, conventional bank loans. We now move to another key aspect of NAMA implementation, the structuring and use of financial mechanisms to achieve the objectives of the NAMA. Here we can make the following observations and recommendations. Many outlines have used innovative financing mechanisms from the possible menu of instruments, with an emphasis on high leveraging of NAMA facility funds. This is a positive development. A clear rationale for the selection of the financial instruments should be presented with the initial proposal. The design of the financial scheme should be outlined, for example, the consideration of legal and fiduciary aspects, contractual obligations, documentation, guidance to borrowers, etc. But this can be elaborated more at the DPP and/or implementation phases. Notwithstanding, the NAMA facility expects that the mechanism should be functional and operational within the first year of NAMA support project implementation. The financial mechanism should be based on the business model and adequately take into account an analysis of the market conditions. This should take an emphasis on existing financial instruments and their coverage of the proposed technology or users. For instance, the bank's willingness in the market to finance the proposed technology. As previously stated, market distortions must be avoided or characterized and mitigated. Institutional arrangements are important. The financial entity must apply fair and transparent selection criteria for allocating any financial support. It should demonstrate good governance, i.e., oversight of the funds and fiduciary responsibility. Transaction costs should be described and should be reasonable. The phase-out concept and sustainability beyond the 5-year framework of the NAMA support project also applies to the financial instruments. For instance, how are remaining funds, in the case of, say, a revolving loan fund or a guarantee facility, utilized beyond the term of the NAMA support project? And if so, under what criteria? Okay, so after having presented the lessons learned on feasibility, let us again have a short look at some experiences from the NAMA facility's fourth call. Katerina?
Yes, thank you, Ash, for the lessons presented. As Ash just mentioned, some lessons learned on the crucial financial aspects of NAMA support projects, I will again provide now an example of a NAMA support project that is ambitious in terms of financial leverage and has a financial mechanism that actually supports the process of redirecting funds towards a low carbon trajectory. Let us look at the sugar mills NAMA in Mexico. This NAMA support project foresees an exceptionally high leverage potential of private funding. It aims to leverage private investment of $740 million. The centerpiece of the financial mechanism allowing this leverage is a non-profit grid operating facility that the NAMA support project will help to establish. The NAMA support project foresees to place NAMA facility funds into this grid operating facility, which will then be matched by a potential national contribution. This is to build an equity base upon which loans are raised to finance grid connection and also energy efficiency investments by the owners of the sugar mills. To increase the attractiveness of these investments, a model of shared connections is proposed, grouping adjacent mills. Also, as a kind of sweetener to stimulate initial investments, non-profit grid operation and extended loan maturity for grid investments are foreseen. The recent Mexican energy law implicitly allows the mentioned approach of communalizing of grid connection. To give you another example of a financial leverage, the aforementioned Tunisian NAMA is expected to mobilize more than 160 million euro from the private sector and from another 36 million euro from the public sector. The leverage effect in private funding also indicates that we are talking about a technology that is very close to market competitiveness in the country context. Having presented these examples, I will hand over the word back to Søren as we are having our second Q&A session just now.
Thanks very much, Katharina. With a view to the clock, I think we are doing fine. We would once again like to cover roughly an hour with the webinar, so there's a good 20 minutes left now, and we are certainly more than halfway through. We would now like to address some further questions which we have been receiving during the course of the webinar. But I would like to first point to some questions which will be picked up in different means. For example, we've had some questions on the coordination between NAMA facility and Green Climate Fund activities. And that is a topic which I believe would require probably a separate webinar to run through it, and we will definitely pick it up as part of our own side event to the SBI meeting in Bonn, which will be held on the 12th of May. Then we've also, and thanks for volunteering to that question, got an input as to the question how the NAMA facility could possibly link up with CDM activities. And we do have one project in the fourth call, which is the Ugandan one, where this does play a very practical role. So we would also like to touch separately on that topic, and it might also be something we will be addressing as part of a further webinar. Then there were a couple of questions which were playing in the context of the structure of our calls, of the procedures, of some of the related details. There, I believe this webinar is not a suitable place to address them. Most of the information available you would find on our website, of course. Nonetheless, we will address all the questions received now during this webinar individually by the persons who asked those questions. However, there was one question which is an easier one and which can directly be answered. I will ask Ash to reflect on those. It's a question coming from Juan, and the question is the following. If a country's project is selected, does it affect the chances of a nearby country's proposal?
We don't expect that it would affect the selection. We select all the projects, or the donors select the projects on the basis of their own merits. So no, we don't expect that would affect the chances of a neighboring country's project. We do also have examples where we have chosen a country more than once. Okay,
thanks so much, Ash. Maybe a related question. You mentioned earlier on that the NAMA facility is open to all regions and sectors. I'd like to know, and maybe Katharina could respond to that, if there is any quota with regard to regions or specific sectors.
Thank you, Søren. Yes, very good question. Short answer, the NAMA facility does not have a quota. The decisions are guided by the quality of the submissions and, for example, ambition and feasibility. For further information, we recommend that you also have a look at our general information document that is available on our website, and my colleague Tina will also send it right now to all participants.
Okay, thank you, Katharina. Another question also to which you might be able to respond. You made reference to the financial leverage effect with regard to the Tunisian NAMA support project. Could you please expand a bit on that and explain the financial mechanism behind that approach as you did it with regard to a Mexican example earlier on?
Yes, thanks for this question, Søren. With regard to the Tunisian financial mechanism, the idea behind it is that the energy utility provides a loan at the local financial market and possibly also sources at the international market with the support of the NAMA facility. The energy utility as a single and very potent contracting partner to financial institutions can decrease the perceived risk level and operational costs significantly for banks, and this would be resulting in much better terms and conditions than actually individual small-scale households would be offered. In a nutshell, this means the energy utility then forwards these conditions to households that benefit from the lower interest rate and longer terms of loans. So the government then steps in with a subsidy for the initial investment, and as I mentioned before, the subsidy level is expected to decrease over time.
All right, Katharina, thanks very much for that explanation. Yeah, thanks again for all your questions. We will, at the end of the webinar, have a third and final round of Q&A, so please keep on sending in those questions. I'm looking now to Ash. Please come back to the scene, and he will be presenting some sector and technology specific considerations drawn from the photo. So please, Ash.
Okay, thank you, Søren. The fourth call has received proposals from a wide typology, and we cannot address them separately. However, we do consider it instructive to outline some lessons learned for, say, 6 project types. The first is energy efficiency in buildings. Here we make the following observations. It's important that the owner-user dilemma needs to be considered. This refers to the owner of a building usually paying the cost of energy efficiency measures, while the user typically reaps the benefits. If the two are not allowed, this raises the question of cost and, more importantly, benefit sharing. A holistic or whole building approach to buildings should be used instead of covering only low-hanging fruit. For instance, lighting, air conditioning and boilers, for instance. One should avoid a simple replacement scenario which would have a generally low transformational effect. As previously stated in regard to technology assessment, quality, safety and performance of equipment has to be considered. We should also consider the rebound effects, which can lead to an underachievement of efficiency gains. By this we refer to direct rebound effects, which occur through increased demand for a product, for instance, that is getting cheaper by virtue of its enhanced efficiency, and indirect effects, which occur if the savings from the efficiency gain are used for other climate unfriendly spending. Another common project type is solid waste management, and here we will make the following observations. The 3R principle, reduce, reuse, recycle, and the waste hierarchy are guiding principles for the NAMA facility. i.e., the focus should be more on upstream than end-of-pipe activities, such as landfill only. If an end-of-pipe solution is proposed, it should be made clear how the higher levels of the hierarchy are being dealt with. we would require information on the composition of waste streams with reference to specific case studies, reference to specific feasibility studies. The proposal should demonstrate the feasibility of certain technologies based on an assessment of the alternatives. Again, preferably with a context-specific feasibility study. The social aspects, for example, the inclusion of waste pickers, should be considered. And finally, the implementation timescales should adequately address site selection of waste treatment facilities, permits and licenses, environmental and social impact assessments, and public procurement. Some general comments on renewable energy projects. As with all projects, the transformational effect needs to be clearly demonstrated, i.e. how does the NSP, NAMA Support Project, trigger a sectoral change instead of simply financing a single or a few projects. The technology solution should be analyzed with regard to alternatives in terms of capital expenditure, which should be disaggregated and justified as appropriate, ownership and operation of the assets, operating expenditures or OPEX, and the availability of water and other resources such as biomass and wind. We also make some general comments on mini-grids. The geographical spread of connected households and businesses is a key cost factor here. The higher the investment into the grid, the more the project is about energy access and not mitigation. The ability and willingness to pay of the target group must be demonstrated. Potential use and the types of appliances should be known, and anchor clients should ideally be identified even at the outline stage. The effect of fossil fuel subsidies, if applicable, on the NAMA Support Project must be analysed, as well as other relevant regulations such as national energy tariffs, etc. Next, we move to supply chain projects. Here, the rationale or narrative of an integrated supply chain project must be made clear. It's important to present an analysis of all the relevant concerned sectors of the supply chain and not just the main sector that the NAMA Support Project is focusing on, even if not all the sectors are equally funded by the NAMA Support Project. One should avoid over-complexity of working in too many different sectors, each with its own regulatory authorities, implementing partners, policies, etc., as this may impact the feasibility of the project. Undertaking only pilots in different sectors in order to cope with complexity may be suboptimal because the pilots themselves may not transform the sector. A supply chain project in the beef sector in Brazil has been selected for the detailed preparation phase in the fourth call. Next, we make some general comments in relation to agriculture and forestry. Some issues have been raised about labelling and certification schemes. These include addressing issues such as, is the certification cost covered by higher prices for the labelled or certified products and services? If not, what is the business case? Is there a substantiated demand for labels or certificates? And what is the likely acceptance in the national and international market? How does the envisaged label or certificate compare to other similar initiatives? Environmental issues warrant specific consideration here. For instance, are land use changes, conflicts and the monitoring thereof in the NAMA Support Project adequately considered? Is the availability and scarcity of water and potential conflicts on water use considered and addressed for instance in the context of irrigated agriculture? How are biodiversity issues addressed, for example through the use of endemic species or the avoidance of monocultures? Have environmental impacts been fully assessed, and how are they addressed? What sort of safeguards are in place? And is there a relevant regulatory framework in place, and is it being enforced? What are the rebound effects, and how are these addressed? For example, in the meat production chain, when increased productivity can lead to an increase in herds. In regard to forestry, could a NAMA support project use the REDD+ mechanism? What is the additionality to applying the REDD+ mechanism, and how is the leakage problem addressed? How does the NAMA support project engage relevant stakeholders, including local communities, and how are main polluters such as wood and agri-industry engaged? Finally, we turn to improved cook stoves. Based on our experience through the calls, it is important to address the following issues. Is there a convincing market assessment which addresses both the economic and non-economic, for example, cultural and behavioral aspects and barriers to the uptake of these more efficient stoves? This is particularly important given that paybacks are often short at 6 to 12 months. As previously mentioned, how is the affordability issue addressed? Is this through the provision of end-user financing, microfinance, carbon financing, etc.? And what are the maintenance provisions required to ensure that the stoves remain efficient and generate emission reductions reliably? What does the NAMA support project do differently from existing cook stove programs, and how are the lessons learned taken up? It's important that a credible sales, marketing and distribution plan is required for scaling up dissemination of these improved cook stoves, including a pricing policy which does not distort existing markets. Finally, how is the sustainability of fuel sources addressed by the NAMA support project and beyond the scope of the NAMA support project in order to trigger a transformational change? This concludes the section on sector and technology specific lessons learned. I'll now hand you back to Søren.
Thanks a lot, Ash, for this whole lot of information. We do have some more time left for last Q&A session, and it's getting a bit hectic here because we try to maneuver with most of the questions here on paper version. I would first lean towards Katharina for two questions which came in. The one coming from Meryl, and it reads as follows. In general, does having GIZ as a co-applicant increase chances of funding for an applicant?
Thank you, Søren, and also to Meryl for this question. The answer is a clear no here. GIZ is acting as a grant agent of NAMA facility, yes, but that does not mean that an application where GIZ is playing the role of a co-applicant has better chances to succeed. No, the chances are equal for every applicant.
Okay, I think that's a clear statement. Thank you. Second question coming in this time from Antoine. Does the policy or regulation at the core of the NAMA support project need to be in place before the application is handed in?
Also a very good question. So here I can say that ideally the process to revise policy and or regulations started even before handing in the application. It might also start during a potential detailed preparation phase. But what I would like to stress here is that at the latest, the process of revision should be finalized 1 year after implementation. And the crucial point here is that the investment is made and is happening on the base of this new or revised policy and regulations, definitely 1 year after the implementation has started.
Okay, I think that has been made clear as well. Now there is 2 questions for Ash. The one coming from Torge. It's as follows. You mentioned that leverage is important. Is there a minimum leveraging ratio in order to qualify for NAMA facility funding?
No, there is no minimum ratio. However, our research for the first calls have indicated that overall each euro of NAMA funding has leveraged an average of 7.6 euros of additional private and public funding. I would also say that the NAMA facility has a preference for leveraging private funding over additional international public funding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question streaming in from Mirinda. We are considering a NAMA, but it is not yet inscribed in the country's NDCs. Does this mean we would be considered for the NAMA facility or not?
If the project does not have an NDC, it would still be considered, but it may score lower than one which specifically addresses an NDC.
Okay, cool. There's maybe a last question also with a view to the clock, which Katharina could respond to. The question is, just for clarification purposes, is a 5 years period the maximum time for implementing a NSP, or is the DPP phase already included?
Yes, thank you, sir. And the maximum period of a detailed preparation phase is 18 months, and this can be added to a 5 year of implementation phase. So that would, for example, mean 6.5 years in total.
Okay. Well, thank you for all those questions, and thanks for Ash and Katharina for responding to them. We'd like to wrap up our webinar, and here's just some concluding remarks. So the NAMA facility received an unprecedented level of demand in the 4th call, with 75 applications received. Encouragingly, overall, the quality of the projects submitted has improved. The NAMA facility evaluates projects for funding on the basis of opportunity for transformational change, mitigation potential, and feasibility. And yeah, we would hope that this webinar has addressed some insights as to our lessons learned drawn from the 4th call process so far against these criteria, both in general and technology and sector-specific wise. We would hope that you found all these information to be useful. For those of you who will be attending the SBI meeting in Bonn, and I mentioned that earlier on, please do note that the NAMA facility will hold a lessons learned workshop there, and that will be on Friday the 12th of May. Further information will be made available at the NAMA facility website. You will be provided with a link to the documentation of today's webinar by email. That will include a link to the PowerPoint presentation you've seen just now, as well as a link to the audio file which you could listen into again. For more information on the NAMA facility and to register for our NAMA facility newsletter, please visit our website. So all which remains to say for me, thank you to the round. Thanks to Ernesta, Tina, Katharina, and last but not least Ash for assisting with that seminar and running us through all the content. Thank you for your participation and your questions. We wish you all a pleasant day. Bye-bye from Berlin.